My name is Wade Hadaway. I am the senior district technical rep for the Southeast. I cover Florida, and so I support Tropic Supply in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. I've been with the company for a little over 5 years, and I have been with Tropic for the entirety of my time here. Before coming to work for Ruud, I was a full-time instructor at a technical college, largest technical college in Georgia, Chattahoochee Tech, and I was there for 5 years. And before that, I was on the contracting side of the business. So, and from there, I've done a little bit of everything. We're going to go ahead and just jump right in. If I can get everything to work properly. There we go. So this is part one in a 5-part series that has been named Wade's Words of Wisdom. And if you've been to any of my classes before, you probably think that that is false advertising. If you haven't, you can make up your own mind. But really, the only way to do that is to come to all 5, and then you can form your opinion after you've come to all 5 classes.
Hey, Wade.
Yeah.
Before we get started, a little housekeeping, if you don't mind. For those of you that are on the call, on your Zoom window towards the bottom, you'll see a couple of icons that say Q&A and chat. If at any time during the presentation you've got any questions you want to ask, you can type them in either one of those windows, and we'll either type a response back or we'll ask Wade those questions during the presentation. Thank you, Wade.
Thanks, Todd. So today is part one, HVAC terminology and the science behind it all. And we're really going to cover a lot of different things in this class, and it's going to feel sometimes like a sort of basic science class. And it kind of is, but the idea between the 5 parts is that each part sort of builds on the previous. So today, really the intent today is just to lay a good foundation of, some terms that we all use that maybe we do or don't know what they mean or where they came from, and how mechanical cooling works, right? What's the science behind it? How does it work? If we understand how it works, then I think that it really gives us a better ability to figure out what's wrong when something isn't working properly. So today we got part one, HVAC terminology and the science behind it all. Part two, and so we'll be doing one class every other week, right? So part 2 will be next the 2 weeks from today at 8 a.m. And the idea is for them to run roughly an hour apiece. Might be a little under for some, might be a little over for others, but the idea is an hour. So every other Tuesday, 8 a.m. 2 weeks from now, we'll be doing refrigerant circuit, superheat and subcool. 2 weeks after that, we'll jump into heat pumps and talk about reversing valves and demand defrost. 2 weeks after that, airflow, static pressure, how to properly set up your blower, and how to measure capacity. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is a crucial part of that capacity measurement, or that capacity bit of data that we have to collect. And then we're gonna wrap it up on March 9th with electricity and wiring, and we'll talk about basic electrical theory, how to read wiring diagrams, how to read schematics, and then some sort of basic troubleshooting for wiring and electrical problems. So if you participate, right, you join all 5 webinars, you will get a copy of the heat pump service manual. And if you've ever seen one of the service manuals, it is a great publication. The best thing about the service manual is the diagnostics and troubleshooting section of this service manual has detailed step-by-step descriptions of how to troubleshoot and diagnose every component in the heat pump. They also, each one of those diagnostic walkthroughs has a QR code that you can scan and watch the video. If you've been to any of my in-person classes, you've gotten at least over the last 3 years or so, you've gotten a service manual when you came to a class. Additionally, there's going to be 4 giveaways during each class. So today, about halfway through, I'll ask 2 questions. The way you're going to answer those questions is you're going to put your answer in the chat box that Todd just talked about a few moments ago. So when I ask question number 1, the first person to put the correct answer in the chat is going to win that prize. So this isn't necessarily representative of the prizes that are going out today. The prizes will be randomly selected, but they will be valued at $50 or more each. And like I said, there's 4 chances for that. So you come to all 5 classes, that's quite a few chances for you to win, as well as getting the service manual. So we're just going to jump right in. So HVAC, one of my pet peeves, and I'm probably not alone in this, but it really bugs me when people say HVAC instead of HVAC. I don't know why. I don't want to start a debate in the chat or anything, but it stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. What is air conditioning? Well, really, very simply put, and the same thing, it's the same for refrigeration, right? And air conditioning really is just refrigeration. But when we talk about air conditioning, what are we doing? We're moving heat. We're taking heat from a place that we don't want it, and we're moving that heat to a place where it doesn't matter or where we don't care if that heat is. And that's all we're doing. And we're doing that with our refrigerant, whatever that refrigerant is. That is our medium that we're moving the heat with. If you think of the refrigerant as a sponge, the refrigerant absorbs the heat inside and then rejects the heat outside. So you load up the refrigerant and then you take that refrigerant outside and you bring it out. And so that's what we're doing. We're just moving heat around. So what is heat? Heat is the transfer of thermal energy. And as we all know, it's measured in temperature, and there's a lot of different scales of temperature that you can measure heat in, right? Here in the US, we use Fahrenheit. Most other countries around the world use Celsius, Kelvin, Rankine. There's a lot of different scales that we measure the amount of thermal energy. And in our industry, right, in heating and air, HVAC, we're really concerned with 2 different types of heat energy. And one is sensible heat, and sensible heat results in its change in temperature. So when you look at any thermometer, a thermostat, whatever that display is, that is sensible heat. And a lot of times, if you look at a spec sheet for a piece of equipment, it's rated in total, sensible, and latent, which is the next type of heat energy that we're concerned with. And latent heat results in a change in state of matter. So sensible heat is the heat that you can sense with your thermometer. Latent heat does not necessarily change the temperature of matter, but it changes the state of that matter. And we're going to go into that a little bit deeper here in just a second. So the study of heat or the branch of physics that deals with heat and energy is referred to as thermodynamics. And there's a lot of different rules or laws of thermodynamics. I want to talk about two specifically today. So the first law of thermodynamics, or the law of conservation of energy, I got a typo there I need to fix. The law of conservation of energy states that any energy, right? Specifically, we're talking about heat energy today, but really any kind of energy. It can't be created, it can't be destroyed. We could just move it around. So the law of conservation of energy states that the amount of energy in the universe is constant. Again, what are we doing with the heat energy? We're absorbing it into the refrigerant inside and then rejecting it outside. So we can't create energy, we can't destroy energy, we can just move it around. And we're going to transfer that to whatever our refrigerant is. And the second law of thermodynamics is a lot of times referred to as entropy or disorder. And really what that states is that heat energy flows from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. And the larger the delta is between those two temperatures, the faster that heat is going to move. And that's how we're moving the heat in a heating and air system. We're gonna manipulate whatever our medium is, or our refrigerant, in order to have it absorb heat or reject heat. And that heat gets transferred to substances in one of three basic processes, right? Through conduction, which is when we're just transferring heat through a solid. And the transfer of that heat has everything to do with how good a conductor that material is. So if it's cold outside and you walk over to your car or your truck and you put your hand on your truck, your hands start to feel cold pretty quick because the metal that your vehicle is made of is a very good conductor. But if you were to do the same thing with, say, a wooden fence post, your hand wouldn't feel as cold as quickly because that wood is not as good a conductor as the metal is. Convection, which is transferring heat through the movement of a fluid or gas, which is what we're doing, right? We're transferring heat typically, right, in a residential heating and air system, we're transferring heat in and out of the air, right? So typically it's convection. It's forced, but it's still convection. And then radiation is the transfer of heat through electromagnetic waves. And you can see, like in the diagram, the radiant heat or the radiation is what's heating up the person's hand coming from the fire. It's also that radiant energy that allows us to see the flames. As that radiant energy reflects off of our eyes, that's how we see things. So what's a BTU? A BTU stands for British Thermal Unit, and a British Thermal Unit is the amount of heat energy that is required to change the temperature of 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. We can add a BTU to pound of water to raise the temperature 1 degree Fahrenheit, or we can remove 1 BTU from that water to lower the temperature of that water 1 degree Fahrenheit. And it's about the amount of heat energy that comes from the burning of a match. That's roughly 1 BTU. So what's a ton? What's a ton of air conditioning? I don't know how to get rid of this thing up here, but all right. So a ton of air conditioning, when we talk about tonnages of AC, we're talking about the system's capacity. So what is that system's ability to add or remove heat from a conditioned space? And a ton of air conditioning is 12,000 BTUs per hour. 12,000 BTUs per hour is 1 ton of air conditioning. And if you look here, this is a picture of the data plate from an RP 1536. And what those numbers and letters mean, right? So it's a Ruud. P stands for pump, so it's a heat pump, 15 SEER, 36,000 or 3-ton unit. But that does not mean that this piece of equipment can remove exactly 36,000 BTUs, right? This 36 tells us it's a 3-ton just because as an industry, we rate equipment in set capacities. If you look at, say, the ductless or mini split world, they rate equipment by BTUs per hour. They don't rate them by tons typically, right? So the only way to really know exactly what this matchup can remove is to look at the spec sheet. And that's going to depend on indoor unit and outdoor unit. So, or look at the spec sheet or the AHRI directory website, and that will tell you what the total capacity is. So you see right here, we've got this RP 1536 paired with an RH1T 3617, and it's rated at 35,600 BTUs. If you're, and the reason that I want to bring this up is because if you're pulling a system out and you're going back in with another system, if you don't know what the system you took out was rated at, and you don't know what the system you're putting in is rated at, you might be pulling out a system that is sort of a fat 3-ton, right? Maybe it's rated at 39,000 BTUs, and you're going back in with a system that's rated at 35.6, and you might have some problems. So the only way to really know what that matchup is rated at is to either look at the spec sheet for that unit, which for that outdoor unit, which is really only going to list the most popular matchups, or go to the AHRI directory at ahridirectory.org, and you can look it up there. I'd always recommend to do a load calculation anytime you're doing a change out. I know that that's not a lot of times that's not done, but you can get yourself into problems if or situations if you just pull out a piece of equipment and put back in what you think is the same tonnage. It might not be. So when we talk about tonnage or tons of air conditioning, that capacity really comes from the heat energy required to change the state of matter, not the temperature. So when we talk about that 12,000 BTUs per hour, it's really based on latent heat, and the ton or tonnage refers to a ton of ice. So 2,000 pounds of ice. That's how tonnages or tons of air conditioning is rated. So it takes 144 BTUs to melt 1 pound of ice. We're not changing the temperature at all. We're taking 1 pound of solid water at 32 degrees, and we're converting it to 1 pound of liquid water at 32 degrees. We're not changing the temperature. We're just changing the state. And I'll show you how that works out. So 144 BTUs times 2,000 pounds gives us 288,000 BTUs divided by 24 hours, and that's where we come up with 12,000 BTUs per hour. And the reason that it's important is because a couple slides back, when I was talking about what is a BTU, it doesn't take nearly the amount of energy to change the temperature of that 1 pound of ice as it does to change the state of that 1 pound of ice. And if the same is true with the refrigerant that's going through our refrigeration system or our refrigerant lines. It takes a lot more energy to evaporate the refrigerant and to condense the refrigerant than it does to just add sensible temperature to it. So in 2 weeks, when we talk about superheat and subcool and the refrigerant circuit, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's why knowing how much subcooling you have and how much superheat you have in a system is so important, because if we change the state of the refrigerant in either one of our coils too early or too late, we're sort of leaving a lot of capacity there on the table.
Wade, we have
Yeah.
a question asking why you're multiplying by 2,000.
Because of 2,000 pounds in a ton, right? So we're talking about tonnages of air conditioning, and it's based on that ton of ice. So 144 BTUs times 2,000 pounds.
Thank you.
Sure. And so I know we're talking about, specifically we're talking about water here, and not refrigerant, but it is representative to sort of show. So it takes 144 BTUs to melt 1 pound of ice to 1 pound of water, right? We haven't changed. It's 32 degrees and 32 degrees. It takes 970 BTUs to evaporate 1 pound of water. So if we take a pound of water at 212 degrees and convert it to a pound of steam at 212 degrees, it takes 970 BTUs to do that. So again, that's why it's so important to know what the state of the refrigerant is when it's leaving either coil. Again, most of the work, right? The lion's share of the work in mechanical cooling is done changing the state of the refrigerant, not the temperature of the refrigerant. Oh, so some questions. Our first question is, what is a British thermal unit? So if you could tell us, first person to tell us what the definition of a BTU is. Yeah, that ain't gonna get it, Jim. Good try though. We need to know, what is a British thermal unit?
We have Glenn Harvey saying a measurement of heat.
That's true, but how much?
We have David saying energy to change 1 pound of water 1 degree.
Yeah, we'll get that. We got a winner.
Okay, that was David Toombs.
Nice job, David. All right, so our second question is, where can you find the BTU capacity of a Ruud HVAC system? And there's 2 possible answers for this. I talked about them a little bit ago on slide where we were looking at a data plate. So where do you find that information?
Patrick saying condenser plate.
No, so that tells you what the what tonnage it is, but that's not really telling you what the capacity of that system is, right? That's the point that I was trying to make.
Going way too fast. Jeepers. Hang on a second.
Right. So the point that I was trying to make is that if you're just looking at the data plate, you don't really know what the true capacity of that system is.
Okay, Robert answered in the specs.
In the specs, that's correct.
Robert Breaux, B-R-E-A-U-X. Nicole, I hope you're writing these down.
I am. I have them both written down.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Good job, y'all. All right, so we're going to move on to part 2. So I would love it if I could. There we go. That's better. That moves. We're going to move to part 2, which is I'm going to start with the pressure temperature relationship. So one of the other things that allows refrigeration, as we do it, right, to work is the pressure temperature relationship and the science and specific gas laws. So pressure and temperature have a direct relationship. And as pressure increases, temperature follows. And then conversely, as temperature decreases, pressure follows. As we compress a gas, the temperature goes up. As we release that pressure, the temperature goes down. And you've seen this anytime you've taken a refrigerant drum out of your hot service van. Maybe earlier in the day, you put your gauges on that drum, and you saw that the pressure was a little bit lower, especially if it's maybe this time of year, a little bit colder in the morning. And as it heats up over the day, the cylinder itself gets warmer, and the pressure in that drum is hotter. If you've ever been recovering refrigerant and you get to a point where your things are slowing down, if you take your recovery cylinder and you put it in a bucket of ice or a bucket of ice water to cool your cylinder down, it makes your recovery go faster. And we can see the pressure temperature relationship by looking at the PT chart, right, for any refrigerant. Like I mentioned, if it's 110 degrees, the pressure in that drum is going to be roughly 366, 365 psig. If you take that same drum of refrigerant and lower the temperature, the pressure is roughly 185. So at 65 degrees, this drum is going to be about 185 psig. But at 110 degrees, it's going to be 366 and a half. And all we've done is add or remove heat to this drum. If you have a recovery cylinder that maybe wasn't marked properly, as long as that is not a mixed refrigerant, if the refrigerants in there are not mixed up, right? And I don't mean a blend, right? 410 is a blend. If you've got a drum of refrigerant that only has one refrigerant in it, you don't know what it is, you hook your gauges up to it, and you know the temperature of that cylinder, you can make at least a reasonable determination of what's in there.
Wade, if you'll hold on just a second, we got some.
Yeah, I saw some stuff flashing.
Yeah, so the questions are mainly about where to answer the questions. So if those of you that joined us later on on your Zoom window, you'll see a couple of icons. There's one icon that says Q&A, and there's an icon that says chat. You can type your answer into either the Q&A or the chat. We're monitoring both of those. And when you type your answer, it lets us know who is typing that answer. So it does identify you to us as to who's typing the answer, and it comes in order, so we'll know who the first person is that answered correctly. Again, you can answer them in either the Q&A icon, just type your answer in and hit enter, or the chat.
Todd, is it easier to sort of pick one or the other so you're not having to look back and forth?
Yeah, the chat's definitely easier.
Okay, well, let's just say at the Q&A, put your answers in the chat window and not necessarily in the Q&A window. That way it just makes it easier for Todd to see which is the first correct answer that comes up. So we're going to talk about psychometrics now, or the study of the air. And really, when we talk about air conditioning, we're conditioning the air, right? And if we don't understand the air and its properties, it makes it a lot more difficult to really do our jobs, do them properly and be effective. So there are 5 specific things that I want to talk about as they relate to psychometrics. Dry bulb, wet bulb, dry bulb and wet bulb temperatures, relative humidity, dew point, and enthalpy. And enthalpy is the measurement that we're going to use when we get to airflow. We're going to use that enthalpy measurement to help us calculate the exact capacity of that piece of equipment, not its rated capacity, but exactly how many BTUs that system is removing from the space. And sometimes that can really help us with troubleshooting. So you'll have to come back for part 4, I believe it is, for that. All right, so this is a psychometrics chart. We are going to talk a little bit about the psychometrics chart. Now you can get, let me go back to this. Any 2 of these readings will allow us to plot everything else that we need to plot. Now, do I expect anybody in here to be walking around with the psychometrics chart and plotting out their airflow and plotting out the qualities and properties of the air? No, I don't. There are all sorts of tools that you can get to do this. There are online calculators. There are apps that you can plug it into. But again, we're sort of starting from the basics or the building blocks. And I want to talk about the psychometrics chart just to show you how this is all related and really what it all means and where these numbers come from. All right. So when you look at the psychometrics chart, you can see that we have along the bottom, that bottom straight line, that's where we're gonna read our dry bulb temperature. And the dry bulb is your standard sensible temperature. It's read on your standard thermometer, on your thermostat, and it is indicated by the vertical lines, and you can see the scale here goes, in this example, goes from 0 to 80. So if we had a 70-degree dry bulb temp, that vertical line is how we're going to read that dry bulb temperature. And your wet bulb is read on a wet bulb thermometer. And that wet bulb temperature varies with the amount of moisture that's in the air. And I'm going to show you in just a second exactly how that works. And it is, it's read across this sort of arc, or that sweeping line that's starting at 0. And then the example here, it goes up to 70. We've got a 60-degree wet bulb, and we're going to follow that down. And where the 70-degree dry and the 60-degree wet bulb meet is where we're going to draw. We're going to get all the other readings that we're going to look at today. Right. So relative humidity is going to be plotted at that point where wet bulb and dry bulb meet. And you can see right here at a 70-degree dry bulb, 60-degree wet bulb, we have right about 55% relative humidity. Now, I could do this with my field piece psychrometer that I have. It'll tell me all these readings. I could get dry bulb temp and relative humidity, and I could plot this point and read everything else off of it. Or I could get my dry bulb and relative humidity and plug them into a calculator that I either find online or in an app, and that would spit out all these numbers to me. Now, why are they important? Just bear with me for a second. Right, so this is the point that we're going to read everything else. So temperature and relative humidity. Why the relative humidity is important, especially here in the Southeast, is because our bodies regulate temperature by evaporative cooling. And what's supposed to happen is when it's hot and we sweat, that sweat is supposed to evaporate, and the amount of heat energy that it takes to convert the sweat to vapor cools your skin. And it's the same sort of thing that happens if you take a cotton ball with some alcohol and rub it on your arm. As the alcohol evaporates, it has a cooling effect on your skin. And that's what evaporative cooling does. Doesn't work as well here in the Southeast as it does, say, in the Southwest, right? You go to Arizona, New Mexico, and when your clothes don't get wet, it's 110 degrees outside, right? Because as soon as you sweat, it evaporates. So why does it evaporate so quickly? Because the relative humidity is a lot lower out west than it is here in the Southeast. So the evaporation rate of the moisture on your skin is dependent on the relative humidity whatever air you're standing in. And wet bulb and dry bulb, specifically talk about this. So you can see that this is a sling psychrometer. Sling psychrometer has been around for a long time. It is a very old school tool and way to read wet bulb and dry bulb. And the reason that they're called wet bulb and dry bulb is because on your sling psychrometer, there is a little cotton sock that goes over the sensing bulb or the bulb of the thermometer. And this cotton sock is drenched with water, and that is why it's called the wet bulb. So we've got the wet bulb and the dry bulb. And for those of you who don't know what a sling psychrometer is or how it works, is there's a pivot point here. If you can see on the bottom image, that as you take this sling psychrometer and you spin it around, the air in the space that the sample of air is flowing through and across this wet bulb, and that water in the wet bulb evaporates. It makes the wet bulb temperature lower than the dry bulb temperature. And then we take those two numbers and we line them up on our chart or on our graph, or specifically on the sling psychrometer, there's a slide that we can match them up, and that tells us what the relative humidity is. And that's where the numbers come from on the psychometrics chart. That's where the numbers come from in the psychometric app that you might use, or where they come from on the digital psychrometer. That's where that's coming from, right? So here's a field piece digital psychrometer. I'm not shilling for field piece. This just happens to be the same one that I own, and it will tell you wet bulb, dry bulb, relative humidity, dew point, enthalpy, many other measurements of the air. Which brings us to dew point. So we're going to read dew point from that same point, but instead of reading it diagonally or horizontally, it's going to go vertically. I mean, instead of reading it diagonally or vertically, we're going to go horizontal, straight across. And in this sample of air, 70-degree dry bulb, 60-degree wet bulb, we have a 53-degree dew point. So the dew point is the temperature that moisture condenses out of the air. Why is that important for us? You can see bullet point 2 here. It says temperatures below dew point cause sweating. That's true. But also temperatures below dew point cause the moisture in the air to condense on our evaporator coil, run down the coil, and out the condensate line. So if our coil temp is not below dew point, we're never going to dehumidify. And that dew point is not always 53 degrees, right? That dew point has to do with what our wet bulb temp and our dry bulb temp are. So that dew point is dependent on that sample of air. But if the further the coil temp is below dew point, the faster we're going to dehumidify. But we hit a sort of a danger zone there, that if the temperature of the coil is too far below the dew point, right? So in this sample of air, we've got a 53-degree dew point. If we had a 40-degree coil, we'd be 13 degrees away. We'd have a 13-degree delta from dew point to coil temp, and we'd probably be dehumidifying pretty well. If we had a 38-degree dew point, probably be dehumidifying. A 38-degree coil temp, we'd be dehumidifying pretty well. If we had a 30-degree coil temp, yeah, we're way below dew point, and we are going to remove a lot of humidity from the air, but it's going to freeze on the coil. So we've got a short window, right, of being below dew point, but not so far below dew point that the coil is going to freeze up. And when that coil freezes up, That's exactly what's happening. It's because the temperature of the coil is below freezing. We're still dehumidifying, right? Because the further that delta is, the further the coil temp is from dew point, the faster we're going to pull out moisture. But if we're below freezing, it's going to cause problems, and that's just going to snowball, right? So that brings us to the final reading that I want to talk about regarding psychometrics, and that's enthalpy. So enthalpy is a measurement of the amount of heat energy in any sample of air. So in this example, and it's directly proportionate to the wet bulb temperature. So at a 60-degree wet bulb temperature, that sample of air contains 26.5 BTUs per pound of air, right? So you can see here's our wet bulb line. This sort of simplified chart doesn't show you the enthalpy scale that is just beyond that curve. On a bigger, sort of more detailed psychometrics chart, you'll see that. So wet bulb temperature determines enthalpy. Now, enthalpy is one of the two readings that we have to take in order to plug these numbers into the formula that I mentioned earlier, that we'll talk about when we talk about airflow, that will allow us to calculate capacity. So we have to know wet bulb, we have to convert that wet bulb to enthalpy, and that's one of the numbers that we're going to plug into our formula. If you've ever filled out a job site sheet or looked at one of our job site sheets, that job site sheet, or that JSIS, asks for indoor wet bulb and dry bulb across the indoor coil. And that's why, because sometimes we might want to look at those readings and see exactly how much heat that system is pulling out of the air. And there's a couple of different ways, again, that you can convert wet bulb temperature to enthalpy. One is with your psychometrics chart. Well, I get it. Nobody's going to ride around in their service van or truck or anything else, or even at your office, with a psychometrics chart. But there is a psychometrics, an enthalpy table. And I actually, when we go over the capacity formulas, I'll make sure that all of y'all have a copy of this table before that class. So I'll make sure that I get one to Nicole and ask her to email it out to all of y'all so that you have the table when we're going through it. But what this table is showing us is that any wet bulb temp, and you can see across the top here is this table is built on tenths of degrees. So our sample that we had was a nice round 60-degree Fahrenheit wet bulb, and a 60-degree wet bulb correlates to 26.46 BTUs per pound. Again, if you have a sort of fancy digital psychrometer, you can get the number there. If you don't, if you just have a wet bulb, dry bulb, you can plug those numbers into a calculator. So here's an example of a psychometrics calculator, and I just Googled it, and this is what I came up with, right? So imperial or metric. So you can go back and forth. Any two of these that you put in and then hit calculate, it's going to spit out the rest of this data. So if you have dry bulb and relative humidity, that's fine. That's enough. It'll tell you dew point, enthalpy, wet bulb, all of that. And so when I'm trying to help people troubleshoot things, this wet bulb and enthalpy are one of the things that often we don't get. We ask for it, we often don't get it, and I think that's just because a lot of folks don't understand why we're asking for it or why we need it. But without that wet bulb reading and without a accurate airflow calculation, we can't calculate the actual capacity that system is operating with. I want to say, okay, so just a quick review of psychometrics. We talked about dry bulb, we talked about wet bulb. There are lots, and I don't have a screenshot of an app because I don't use an app for that, just because my testing device will tell me everything that I need. So I don't have that, but they're all over. There's free ones, there's ones that you can pay for, etc. So before we move on to the last two questions, does anybody have any questions specific to what we to the stuff that I've gone through today? It looks like we're going to end up a little bit short. I mean, not take the whole hour today. So if there's any questions, let's go ahead and go over those now.
Will there be a way to view later or download these sessions?
I believe you guys record these.
Yes, there will be. I'll send an email out once the class is over and I have a chance to upload the video to YouTube so you guys can see the link from your location. So once that's done, I'll send out an email and everybody will have that information.
Terrific. Thanks, Nicole. Any other questions than that? No? All right. Remember, you guys are going to answer in the chat, not in the Q&A. So our third question is, what is dew point? Define dew point. So what does that mean? If I say I have a dew point of 53 degrees, what is that?
Point at which air condenses.
Yeah, I would say that it's really the point at which the moisture in the air condenses, but we'll go with that.
See what we got here. So
I think that's right enough. All right, and so our fourth and final question for today is, and I put these questions together a few days ago. I don't remember what they are, so they're a surprise to me too.
Hang on. So Nicole, that was Spiro Calogero, Kalogero. Okay, wait.
Sorry, I forgot. I
forgot. Keep going.
Forgot that you needed to log the correct answer before I went on to the next question. So at constant volume, so if pressure in our refrigerant cylinder rises, what happens to temperature?
Rises.
Temperature rises, right? And so when you think about pressure and temperature, that's exactly what we're doing when we're manipulating temperature. We're manipulating our refrigerant to change the temperature of the refrigerant. And we're either raising the temperature of the refrigerant or we're lowering the temperature of the refrigerant.
And Nicole, that was Norberto Cohen.
And that heat energy comes from, if anybody cares, that heat energy comes from the molecules in that sample getting compressed and being closer together. And as the molecules in that gas are bouncing around, the tighter they are together, the more kinetic energy is released as they're bouncing off of each other. And that's what causes that change in temperature. And it either, as we push them together, it makes the temperature rise, or as we pull them apart, it causes the temperature to lower. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate all of y'all coming this morning. I hope you come back for the next, I want to say next 4 sessions, but it's over the next 8 weeks. So I hope you come back for all of them. I don't know what anybody won. I guess the winners will be notified at some point in the next coming days. So there is a question here. Denzel, did you have a question? You want to put that in the chat? Yeah, so the question about third form of heat. Yeah, there's a lot of different forms of heat, not just sensible and latent, but that's what I specifically wanted to talk about, sensible and latent, because that's really what we're looking at in our samples of air, right? And in samples of air and in looking at psychometrics and stuff like that. But yeah, kinetic heat in molecules is another form of heat energy. Radiant heat, atomic energy heat. There's all sorts of ways to release heat. When you another is chemical reactions, or another way that we can release heat energy, like burning wood is really a chemical reaction that releases heat and chemicals. And as those chemicals and gases get hot, they burn, and that sort of is a snowball effect.
We have another question about the spec sheets. Yes, the spec sheets are available not only at www.myruud.com, but they're also available in the Ruud app, available in the iStore or the Google Play Store.
Correct.
And that goes along with the job site information sheet that Wade was talking about. Those are available in the MyRuud portal as well. If you're not familiar with the MyRuud portal, you can get with your local Tropic Supply HVAC consultant, and they can get you signed up with a username and password for the portal, where you can find just about anything and everything Ruud.
And I believe we did a class. I think we did a webinar on the portal in the app. I don't even mid last year, maybe, that I believe there may be a recording of that. Nicole, you probably know off the top of your head, but if you want to see the information that's available in the app or in the MyRuud portal, there should be a recorded webinar that you can watch. I don't think it was very long, half hour maybe. Awesome, thanks. So Robert, what if your Ruud app's not working? A couple things that you might try: delete the app, update the operating system on your phone or your device, and then reinstall the app, and that may take care of your issue. Anything else? Any other questions? Again, thank you for your time. Thanks so much for the folks at Tropic for putting this together and doing such a good job of promoting it and letting everybody know about it. So I appreciate everyone involved. Thanks again so much for your time. Thanks, Spiro. I appreciate that.